Okay, good morning to everybody who's joined us this morning. It's a very bright and a little bit chilly morning today, but we've got a really fantastic lineup. So welcome to the Edge Talks, and we've got Lois Kelly and Carmen Medina, all the way from the United States, who's actually going to be leading this session for us. And the title of this session today is Necessary but Not Sufficient, Undervalued and Overlooked Approaches for Creating Change. And before we start, I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Janet Wildman, a research associate at NHS IQ Horizons Group, and I'm also going to be presenting you with the team that's supporting the Edge Talks this morning. And I'd like to introduce the Twitter monitor, who is Jodie Brown, and in the chat room we have Dom Krishnan, and we're going to be looking after you this morning in terms of making sure that you can feed in and participate and have a conversation around this really important area. I'd like to also just let you know that you can use the chat box to contribute throughout the webinar, and please just raise your hand to join the discussion. Also, please tweet using the hashtag #EdgeTalks and the handle @SchoolForRadicals and @TheEdgeNHS. So you can also join our Facebook group, School for Health and Radicals and the Edge NHS. After the session, we'll be producing summaries of the discussion on each of the presentations, and we're going to have this on our website. I'm going to just introduce the speakers for today. So we've got Carmen Medina and Lois Kelly. Now, Carmen Medina is a former CIA Deputy Director of Intelligence, a 32-year veteran of the intelligence community. She's known for her expertise in intelligence analysis, strategic thinking, diversity of thought, and innovation and entrepreneurs in the public sector. She's also the author or co-author of Rebels at Work, a handbook for leading change from within. Joining her also is Lois Kelly, who is also the co-author of the handbook Rebels at Work, a handbook for leading change from within. And she's also led digital marketing and public relations agencies before becoming an author. And she's also a specialist in organizational change and an executive leadership coach. So they'll be telling you a little bit more about their work together, but I'm going to quickly hand over to Carmen Medina initially to take us through her presentation and her talk today. So over to you, Carmen.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody across the pond. My name is Carmen, and Lois Kelly is also on the line. I don't know if you want to say hi, Lois.
Good morning, everyone.
And we're really excited and happy to engage with you all in a conversation today. We know many of the people in NHS. We are very thankful for your engagement with the Rebels at Work and organizational change topics. And I know I can speak for Lois that we anticipate learning as much from you all today as you may or may not learn from us. We want to make sure that the conversation today is relevant to you all. So we want you all to ask lots of great questions. And to start off, just to make sure that we understand the audience well, we want to ask you some questions. So we're going to have a series of questions that we're going to ask you, polling questions, so get yourself ready. I promise you they're not too difficult. So here comes the first one. Let's see here. For some reason, poll 2 is showing, but not poll 1.
We've got poll 1 on our screen.
Yeah, but the actual poll, when I pull up the thing, I don't have all of the poll options in front of me. It starts with poll 2.
Okay.
So.
Hi, Carmen.
Yes.
On the polling option, where you've got the list on polling 1, 3, 4, 7, whichever ones you can see, the last tab should be a down arrow, which will show all the missing polls.
Yeah, it's not really doing that right now for me. It shows me poll 3. Oh, I just found poll 1. They're out of order for some reason. Okay, so are you all able to see poll 1 now?
Yes, we are.
So I could just read the question. Which one of the following best characterizes you? We've given you 3 choices. Trying to affect change from a non-leadership position, trying to affect change from a leadership position, and learning about change in general. So we'll wait a few seconds while everybody answers. Okay, some people are putting their choices in the chat room rather than on the poll.
You need to open the poll, Carmen. There's a button to open. That's it. Now everyone should see it.
Yep, I just opened it. Sorry. Okay. So it looks like we just have a couple more people to answer the poll. And we notice right now, and I will now make the poll available to everyone. So when I close the poll, Paula, it will become available to everyone?
Correct.
So hopefully at this moment that you're all seeing the poll results. And it's pretty close between those trying to affect change from leadership and non-leadership positions. Not too many of you are trying to learn about change in general, and there's a good amount of people who didn't answer either because the question did not give you an option that met your situation. So if you could indicate, if you have any concerns, indicate that in the chat or a different kind of category. And now we're going to move to the second poll, in which we're going to ask you to think about the change effort that you are involved in the NHS. And we've given you 3 choices. I'm going to open the poll now. And we're asking you which one of the following best characterizes your change effort. Are you lucky enough to be leading a group of committed change agents? Or are you pushing the ball uphill a little bit? All right, just a couple more seconds to see there's just a couple more people voting. All right, so I'm going to close the poll. And now I will share with you the polling results. And we can see that almost 50% of you are trying to influence people resistant to change. And actually a very strong majority are trying to do that or try to get complacent people to care. And I would say, Lois and I would think this is fairly typical of what we see when we talk to like sector groups about, just a second here, I need to share the poll results. When we talk to people about their change journey, that these are very common characteristics of the group. And now we have one last question to ask you. So with any hope or any luck, the technique improves with each attempt. So here's poll 3. And in this one, we're going to ask you to identify what your top 3 challenges are in leading change. And we've given you a choice of 6. So this one may take a little bit longer. And I'll just read them while you're thinking. Afraid I might hurt my reputation. My boss resists most new ideas. I hate dealing with conflict and controversy, and I certainly did. Working through the approval process, not your cup of tea. My ideas go against culture. Or, you know, you just feel unprepared. You don't know enough about how to lead change. So again, I'll just wait a little while and let you all sort through this. And I believe that you can pick 3 challenges, 3 choices. Up to 3 choices.
I think it'll only allow people to answer one. I missed my mistake when I created it.
Okay, so pick the one you care about most then. All right. I'll give it about 5 more seconds. Now I'm closing the poll. See, there's a lot of great comments in the chat room about our list of impediments to making change. And one of the great things about WebEx, and if you're active in the chat or just lurking in the chat, you can learn from other people. It's a multidimensional experience. So I'm going to share the poll results with everyone. And hopefully everybody can see the poll results. So fascinating that nobody, I get a 0% on that it might hurt your reputation or career. And then the culture and approval process are neck and neck, each at 25% roughly of the participants. Yeah, I agree with someone in the chat who said that it's really positive that the hurting your reputation or career is 0%. I think what Lois, and I'm about to turn it over to Lois now, and I might say that it's always good for change agents, rebels at work, to be realistic about the potential costs of this on your career path, but certainly not to let it hold you back. And thank you very much for your responses and for your patience with the technical issues. And now I'll turn it over to Lois. I'm passing the baton right now.
Great. Thanks, Carmen. So this morning we want to go through we're going to give some context that we're seeing about change, whether that change is leading change within yourself, among your group, or with your boss or other people you're trying to influence. And then we want to divide this into three sections. One is, how do you change the mindset of an organization? The second thing is ideas for communicating. And the third is looking at habits. Often people will ask us, they'll say, how do I change the culture of my organization? And I laugh a little bit just because we say you can't change the culture. However, you can change habits. So we'll go through these sections, and after each section, we'll take a pause and ask some questions. So just to start, I'm sure many of you have heard these, love this chart that was shared with us, 50 reasons not to change. People have lots and lots of reasons why they shouldn't change. And often, as change makers, we look at the urgency of a situation, and we create really good solutions and then roll them out. And often, despite all that work, nothing happens. So one of the things we want to suggest this morning is that urgency and good solutions are necessary, but they're not sufficient. So what do we mean by that? Well, if we were just to take a step back and think about, why is change so hard? And the real reasons that change is so hard is that there's a lot of discomfort for people, or people are looking, they just want certainty. Tell me that this will absolutely work. They're afraid, or they feel like they don't have time, or they just really loved the way things used to be. And often people will say that, why change is hard are reasons that they can't even articulate. So this is a really important point, that the real resistance to change is often hidden. It's people don't even know why they're resisting. So one of the important things is to make sure you get the problem right. What's really going on? Why are people really resisting? And if you don't know what that is, you can do brilliant solutions and communications and work really hard, and very little will change. So the big thing here is, I love this quote, that the biggest failure of leadership is to treat adaptive challenges like technical problems. Adaptive challenges like technical problems. Now, when this concept was first introduced, I was a little confused. I'm like, well, what does that exactly mean? So let me show you. Technical change are very sort of more black and white things, where, it might be a new technical, system that you're trying to use, or it might be a new way to follow a process. So it's very, this is the information you need. Whereas adaptive change is that we have to really stretch into a new way of being. So we're either asking people to change outside of their comfort zone, or we're asking the organization to kind of challenge deeply held beliefs. And it's often the adaptive change that trips us up. So let me give you some examples. So some issues might be, the issue is that we want students to learn and to become learners. And in the United States anyway, one of the things that we have done is to create standardized tests and teacher evaluations, which is really a technical solution to a much bigger adaptive change issue. Or another issue might be, wow, our workforce is sort of disengaged, and we really want to motivate our people. And companies and organizations have employee surveys. And they say, well, we did an employee survey, and this is what we learned. And again, it's just a very technical solution, and it's not really getting at the adaptive issues. Or another one might be people in a certain profession or industry need to adapt more quickly to changes. And organizations roll out learning platforms, and that's it. I mean, that's part of the solution, but it's necessary but not sufficient. So in adaptive change, in technical change, you can have an expert, or it can be from sort of the top down. Here's what you need to do. In adaptive change, we have to involve the people affected in creating the right solution for them. So there's, back in the, in the 1960s in the United States, there was this saying, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And really, with so many change efforts today, if you're not part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. So as change agents, part of what makes us effective is inviting and bringing in more and more people with us to create ways to improve the situation. And it's for a lot of organizations, it feels very uncomfortable because we're used to sort of the people with the expertise figure it out and introduce it to everybody else. But in fact, because we have so much adaptive change, we have to involve everybody. Another approach to uncovering what the real problem is, I would like to introduce this to you. We won't go into too much depth, but it's called immunity to change. And it was introduced by two professors from the Harvard Education School. And this immunity to change is a fairly straightforward process that uncovers big ahas. It's like developing a map, or almost like an X-ray, that uncovers a person or an organization's hidden immune system. What's really holding people back from change. So I would encourage you to look at this book. Minds at Work is the website, and they also run a MOOC learning program, which is very good. But basically, the process looks at, what's the big change goal that you have, and then uncovers what are you doing against achieving that goal, and then uncovering hidden commitments and big assumptions. So in this example, a teacher she knows what she should be doing. She's not doing it because what the real issue is that she's afraid if she does that, she'll create a problem with her manager. Another example is when I recently did this process with a group, there was someone who was head of an advertising agency, and his big goal is, he said, for the last 5 years, I've had a big goal of getting larger clients, and I never get around to doing it. And we went through the process, and, he listed what he doesn't do. He micromanages his teams. He gets involved in every decision. And what really came out for him, and it was his big aha, is that he didn't fully trust his team. So when you get those big ahas, then it invites you to say, is that a correct assumption? And if you know what that real resistance is, it allows you to address it. I worked with another group, and some of you in healthcare may see this. Sometimes it happens between people. Sometimes it's if you have very highly educated physicians and people with less education in the health system, that there are issues. There was one I had recently with 2 teams, and the real resistance, the real issue with changing is one group. What came out is they just felt that they were much smarter than the other team. And because underneath they thought they were smarter, they weren't listening to the other group. Once that surfaced, the 2 groups could talk that through and address the real deal. So I would suggest to you, in anything you're going after, what's the real problem that you're trying to solve? It's a really interesting question. Sometimes we get caught up in tactics. We want people to do X, Y, Z. But what problem are you trying to solve? And the second thing that then goes with that is, what do you and what do people need to be able to do that? What do you need to be able to solve that problem? What are the skills? What are the mindsets? What are the behavioral change? What do you need to acknowledge to solve that problem? And so that's just a little bit of context. And again, I think it's important because a lot of times people are trying to solve the wrong problem. So in summary for this section, we often apply technical solutions to sort of adaptive, more complex people challenges. We get the problem wrong, so we spend a lot of time trying to solve the wrong thing. And our immunity system prevents us from seeing what the real resistance to change is. So that's just some context to kind of set us up. And then we will go to, let me just quickly do this poll. So in the poll, just from this beginning context, be curious to know in your organization, which one of these situations you've encountered the most. Have you applied technical solutions too often to adaptive challenges? Did you get the problem wrong? Or is your immunity system really preventing you from seeing the real resistance? So just take a second to do that. Such a good group. Everyone's busy answering the poll. Okay. So just one more second. So let me close the poll. We can see the results. I see it's busy closing. And can everyone see those poll results now? So it looks like it's interesting that it's pretty evenly split. Applying technical solutions to adaptive problems, getting the problem wrong, and the largest one is the immunity system preventing people from, organizations from seeing the real issue. Great. Okay, so we're going to move now to, I'm going to hand this over to Carmen, but we're going to start off this section about really what do we need to open mindsets, our own and those with whom we work. And we're going to go through, we have many ideas for you this morning, so we'll go through them kind of fairly quickly and know that you can access all of this later. But we're going to go through, threats, knowing the organization, thinking styles, objections, and some things around optimism and grit. So with Carmen, I believe I'm going to pass this over to you.
Thanks, Lois. We are going to go on to the next session, but as promised, next section, but as promised, I think what we would like to do now is hear from the moderators of the chat room and Twitter whether or not there's any interesting questions or comments that we should comment on right now.
Hi, Dom and Jody.
Janet.
Hi, it's Jody on the line. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me okay? It's Jody.
I can hear you fine.
Excellent. Okay, well, Twitter's really been hotting up whilst Lewis and Carmen have been talking. People joining in that aren't necessarily on the WebEx as well, responding to some of the comments. But really the overriding opinion is how great it is to hear these ideas kind of from outside the NHS, and then to overlay them on the kind of problems we're experiencing at the moment in the NHS and how valuable that is. So that was a comment that Michaela Slocum made. Hannah Saeed came in and she said she's not aware of any necessary and sufficient solutions for improvement. So, you know, that's really the challenge that we're up against. And I really like the comment from Richard Corder, who said resistance to change is often hiding. If you're not part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. And, you know, I think that's a really valid point about how we can sometimes avoid being part of the solution, and we can avoid kind of that conflict and things feeling a little bit up in the air. So, yes, really great chat going on, and it's building as we're getting further into the WebEx. So I'll look forward to feeding back some more later. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Jodie. What about in the chat room, Dom? What's happening there?
Yeah, I think as we can see, the chat, people are having lots of conversations here. There's quite a lot of interest on why change is so hard. And you made a great point about ideas and cultures are really important, but they're often out of sync. Elizabeth Wood mentioned that getting hold of data to support measuring any change is tricky, and I think this is something that we find when we talk to people is that they're always coming against people that are asking for data to support what they're doing. But going on to the second half of what we were talking about, Zoe Lord made a question, was that if you're not part of the problem, then you can't be part of the solution. Where do fresh eyes come from? What if the people with the problem don't have the skills? I don't know if anybody's got any comments on that.
Was there anything about the polling results that came through? Was there any surprises on that?
Like current data, does change always have to be oriented around a problem? People are kind of mulling over what we're talking about.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Thank you both. I'm handing you back over to Carmen now.
If I can just make a couple of comments, and Lois, you may want to comment on that as well. The comment that if you have to be part of the problem to be part of the solution, where does that leave getting a fresh perspective from outside? And I think it's a valid point. I don't think we're suggesting that everyone has, that you shouldn't get an outside perspective. But our experience, certainly my experience in government and private industry, is that often people within the group, there's the rebel in there who has some perspective on the solution and that needs to be given the opportunity to contribute. Lois, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, I think that we rely sometimes too much on experts, we keep thinking the answer is on the outside, and so many answers and tremendous ideas are sitting right there with us if we would only involve people and truly listen to them.
Right. And then another thing that I saw in the chat room, because I love chat rooms, so I'm always lurking, is I think it was a very valid comment that a couple of people suggested that we're framing the change journey in terms of the organization doing it. And this is particularly important in healthcare because healthcare is an entire ecosystem involving the patient, right, the families, the community. And I know, Lois, you have a lot of experience with this dimension of healthcare, so I wonder if you wanted to comment on that.
I will comment on that as we get into some of the more specific things. So I think it's really, it's very valid and important, and it starts with, in the healthcare system, how we invite people into the process and make it safe for everyone to be involved. And so too often it's the sort of the experts not quite making the families and the patients feel as though their views, their worries, and their concerns are valid. And it's a very subtle signal.
Right. I'm about to give the ball back to you, Lois, to start off the next section. But I will just say that, one of the things an issue I care a lot about is cognitive diversity. And this gets, and oftentimes what happens in organizations or, in a situation where there are some people that supposedly are authoritative and then everyone else is just supposed to listen to them, is that you prevent diversity of views from occurring by declaring that only some views are important and others are not. And so I don't think we mean to suggest that the only positive force for change is within organizations. I think the comments about really it's about a much broader ecosystem are true, frankly. So with that, I'll send the ball to Lois.
To start the mindsets, one thing that whether it's as an individual talking with people or as an organization, one of the most important things we can do is to make it safe for people to have meaningful conversations and to suggest ideas. But often we create threats. And when we create those threats, the prefrontal cortex in people, it just shuts down. So one thing with the mindset, I find David Rock's, from his book Quiet Leadership, his Neuroleadership model really helpful when we think about how we're communicating, what we're introducing. He says there are 5 things that either can create threats or conversely attract people towards us and open them up to want to learn and think about things. So the first is status. People are looking at, how do I stack up against others? And the second is certainty. Am I able to envision my future? Autonomy is the feeling of, am I in control of the situation or my life? Relatedness, where people want to know, is this person sort of my friend or my enemy? And fairness, am I being treated as well as other people? And we all have one or multiple triggers that trigger us. And also sometimes you will see, themes and organizations with these things. So they're useful to remember so that, in status, the way we can make it feel safe for people or not make them kind of push back is to acknowledge achievements or not make them look bad. Certainty, where we can give people as much information as possible about changes or options as soon as possible. It gives them, it just calms them down, opens their mind up for thinking. Autonomy is to give people choices. Relatedness is developing good social connections and that whole, the importance of relationships. And, fairness, when we feel that decisions are being made fairly, we're much more receptive to them. So in organizations, I see, when these get triggered, people just shut down. They just stop, looking at things. Do we wish they weren't that way? Of course. But acknowledging the reality often helps us navigate around them. There was a large project I was working on, and the team worked so hard, had great solutions. People were very excited, and the person who needed to approve a big budget number just was very, very resistant. And people were very frustrated. What are we going to do? So finally, after one meeting, walking out to the parking lot, I saw this person get into a very, very expensive car. And I thought, that's interesting. And went back to the group and I said, I think Jack is really, the status is really important to him. So while we had talked about the benefit to tens of thousands of people of moving ahead on this, and we had all the rationale, he was resistant. So what we did is we played into the status, and we suggested to him that this was such an interesting, innovative approach that if we could do it, it would make a tremendous Harvard Business School case study. And I want to tell you the budget was approved 10 days later because we appealed to status, and we appealed to it for a good reason. So understanding these threats and using them for positive will often overcome some resistance. And Carmen, I'm going to hand it back to you now.
Okay, thank you. Great. Thanks, Lois. So now I want to talk a little bit about probably what is my favorite topic about being a rebel at work, being a change agent, and that is the importance it is for you to really understand your organization, both the written and unwritten rules of the organization. And, you know, we're all creatures of our upbringing and experiences, and I guess this was so important in kind of a Byzantine organization such as the CIA that it just probably, that's why it became an obsession for me, understanding the organization better. So I think a lot about that. So, you know, someone commented earlier, I think maybe it was on Twitter, that all change issues tend to, in the public sector, to be redefined as sort of restructuring issues, right? And I think that's a fair comment. To get beyond that, one of the things you have to do is you've got to do two things generally. You have to understand the emotional temperament of the organization. What does it really care about? And then second, you need the sort of practical insight about how new ideas actually get approved. And one of the things that we suggest is that you actually meet with the master bureaucrats of the organization, or the people that have been there a long time or well tenured, and can tell you, you know, when we did have a significant change occur, how was it done? And I think that understanding the organization, when we use the word organization, of course, I think we mean it more broadly. So in the medicine context, in the NHS context, it also has to be about understanding the patients, right? And the community and the family who are a large, you know, who are in fact part of this organism. So one of the ways that you can understand your cohort, your peer group, is one aspect of this is understanding their thinking style. We don't all have the same approach to problem solving, to assimilating and gathering information. And there's lots of very interesting instruments out there. One that we encourage people who are going to attend this session to take is the past, present, and future thinking. I think I may just go forward a second. Yep, so you can all see the population. There's 230 people have taken this test. And you can see that there's a significant number of people who are future thinkers. That's their predominant thinking style. Many of whom are past thinkers. Not so many are present thinkers. My profile is I'm a strong future thinker. My secondary mode is a past thinker. So what happens to me, and then here's what these thinking styles mean again. What happens to me, and I now that I know this and have taken this test, it's much easier for me to understand my own thought processes. Someone presents a new idea to me, and the first thing I do is investigate whether or not it's ever been done in the past and how that happened, you know, what led to its success or its failure. So you have, you know, all these thinking styles are good. And in fact, I would say that the fact that there's a lot of present thinker, that there's not as many present thinkers in this rebel population that has taken the test, points to what are sometimes issues for change agents, which is the implementation end of the change process. We can come up with the idea and we can be persuasive, but actually carrying through the actual process of going from A to Z becomes quite difficult for us. So it's very important for you to get a sense empirically if you can, but you can learn a lot by observations and interviews. People love to be interviewed, actually. You know, when you say, I'd love to get your ideas about something, it's always something that is very flattering. And then incorporate that in how you are going to approach your change journey. Now, one thing that I've been doing recently is, and if you read our blog, you perhaps have seen a couple of the posts, is I've been reading this massive academic tome called Rebels in Groups. I don't know if it's available in Amazon UK. It's available in the US. It's quite expensive because it was intended as a textbook. But what it does is it summarizes all the recent research on differences and deviance in groups, rebel behavior. And one of the big takeaways that that several of the studies make is how important it is for you to understand your colleagues as you try to implement your change agenda. So we talk a lot in Rebels at Work, the book, about understanding the bureaucrats and navigating the organizational landscape, understand how decisions are made, but we don't, and we talk a lot about gathering supporters around you, but we don't really talk about understanding your colleagues. And the reason why this is important is that when you go into a change initiative, the temperament of your colleagues will determine, the norms of your colleagues will determine how receptive they are to it. So for example, if you're, the group that you're in is cohesive, i.e. they have a strong group identity, they're confident, they feel they're on the right path, although this may seem counterintuitive, they're actually, because they're not defensive, more receptive to change ideas than groups that feel threatened and defensive. The second point, tenured, if they, the group has been together for a long time and they're very experienced, they're going to be resistant to a new person with a new idea. And the social research shows that oftentimes an in-group member, when they present a new idea, will be they'll be met with skepticism by a tenured group. Are they afraid? Again, I mentioned this earlier, that if the group feels threatened, they're likely to become defensive, and that will reduce their appetite for new ideas. And then this external pressure point is interesting, because when they when a group being asked to do something new, if they are first primed with a discussion of how outsiders see them, the research, and a lot of this research was actually done in the UK. The book, I think, was written in Australia or edited in Australia, that individuals, if they're primed by understanding what's going on around them in the ecosystem, they're more likely to agree to go in a new direction than if you ask them to think about it only from their own internal dynamic. And this makes sense, of course. So, you know, in the medical context, we have a strong correlation, or the external dynamic is very strong because of the patient and community aspect. So I think this is something that needs more looking into. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Lois, who will walk us through, for some reason, there we go, the next few slides. Lois?
Yep. This is just a quick thing. This is more on organizational change. What we hear are people say a lot of objections that people hear, and want to hit some of those objections and look at what might the real meaning be versus what people are saying, and ways to possibly respond to that. Some of the most common, and I'm sure you all hear this, is that there are no resources. And, you know, when you keep getting hit with this, often that is the point. And I think it's useful in a group to say, we fund things we believe are important. So if there's a meeting where people say, keep talking about there are no resources, to have a conversation and say, well, maybe we should admit that this is not a priority. And if this is not a priority, what does that mean? It begins to change the conversation and to begin to explore what's important and what's not important. Second thing, often people will, this gets to this desire for certainty. If we do this, how will it affect that? And, you know, sometimes things go around and around because there is no proof. And in those conversations, it's really helpful to talk about what is known, what we can learn, what can be learned, and what is unknowable. And and acknowledge the discomfort of that some things are unknowable, but that shouldn't prevent us from trying it because the upsides could be so potentially valuable. And to talk about the value of trying new things. Similarly, people will say, well, what's the ROI? And what they're really meaning is, like, sometimes it's not the ROI. And again, I've seen people go down a hole of just doing these complex ROI models. And often the real question is, how will we know this is working? And if we can open up a conversation of how will we know this is working, sometimes we can create measures that aren't traditional ROI measures, an ROI model, but we can put things in place so we can track what's working and be able to adjust accordingly. And the last big objection that I often hear is, let's develop some consensus on this. And sometimes, again, it's worth exploring. That often means people are uncertain of the merits, or there are some of those scarf threat issues going on. And again, I would suggest opening up a conversation for people to say, what would it take to see value? What could we do to move this further rather than just going around and having more meetings on consensus? So a question I would just open up is, when you get really stuck, you know, what's the most common objection in your organization, and what might be the meaning underneath that objection, and how can you surface it and talk about it? And this is just I'm actually going to skip this, but this was with something I did where there was with the United States Air Force recently, where they were kind of stuck on changing, and I just mapped out sort of what their existing culture was and what the rest of the world, how the rest of the world viewed things within that SCARF model. And it really opened up thinking and helped them to understand why they're resisting and perhaps why they should get over that. The last thing is on this section is optimism. Optimism, the positive psychologists will tell us that optimism develops tenacity, right? It's not just a feel-good thing, but it develops tenacity. And it's so hard for us to change, for whomever to kind of really embrace change and adopt new ways. So the interesting thing about optimism, it isn't necessarily something that we're just born with, if only, but there are ways we can develop optimism. And what I find really helpful for, you know, individually or with our, you know, groups that we're working with is, what's the self-talk that we give ourselves? You know, do we approach things, do we have sort of a negative narrative going? You know, do we have that defeatist narrative? And can we turn that around? So one way to turn that around and develop that optimism is really to turn to, when we're struggling with things, is to look at, sort of turn to wonder. I wonder why I'm thinking that. I wonder why this, you know, person is struggling with that. I wonder what we might be able to do. And turning to wonder and turning on that curiosity opens our mind to begin to think about things in new ways, and also to be much more empathetic. And perhaps one of the most important skills for all of us as change agents is really to be empathetic and be able to tune into what people are feeling and worried about. So to just wrap up this section, you know, many, you know, things with our mindsets, you know, what they are, and some suggestions on how you and your groups may be able to deal with them. I'm actually going to skip this poll so that we can get into communicating. But we will stop here. Is there anything from the chat board or Twitter that some questions we should address?
Hi there, Jodie. Can you give us an update, please?
Hi. We're having some really interesting discussions on Twitter. There's a kind of flipping out of the WebEx, and like I said before, pulling people in with a little bit of controversy, but it's all good. As Carmen says, you know, very much cognitive diversity in action going on in Twitter. I think that the Twitter room is probably quieter than the chat room from what I can see. So I think it's probably more valuable if we hand over to Dom to give some feedback from what's going on there.
The start model seems to have resonated a lot with people. I think once it was explained, really understood where it was coming from, and I think it's something that's interesting someone was going to take forward. John Bryant made a great comment earlier that I think should be taken forward, using this terminology. So he calls it as citizen rebels. We have a longer journey as we are outsiders for the NHS. And Karen Day kind of makes the comment that, you know, there is a lot of tribalism. It reminds me of tribalism among healthcare professionals. And the conversation kind of followed around that. So it's been quite interesting to watch and listen to people's comments on that.
Great. Thank you. Okay, then we'll move on to some communicating issues. And what we want to, so one of the first things on communicating is often when we get in, if we're in healthcare and we or any, whatever our field is, we get so deep into it that we understand what we want to communicate, but it seems foreign to other people. So few suggestions. One is to, for any new idea, is to frame your idea and connect to what's understood. There's a really well-known book on screenwriting. And what I like from this book is that in pitching a screenplay is that you have to make the new idea familiar. And when you look at many, many new ideas, people connected to what's understood. So when Bill Taylor and Alan Weber were introducing the magazine Fast Company, it was a really new idea, and people were like, we don't understand what you're talking about. And finally they said, well, it's a new magazine that it combines sort of the best of Rolling Stone and Harvard Business Review, and people understood it. There was someone in a big company that I was working with, and they were introducing a much more social way of communicating inside the organization, and a lot of people didn't understand, well, what is this? And they said, well, it's sort of like the love child of SharePoint and Facebook. So the point here is just to make new ideas, you know, to explain them in ways that people understand and can connect to what's familiar. The next thing is in introducing programs or talking to people, often, you know, we hear people say, well, what's the messaging? How are we going to message this program? And I would like to suggest that there are three sort of essential messages, or just kind of three ways to think about things. And it's the what, so what, and now what. So, you know, the what is, what's at stake? You know, why should people care about what you're talking about? How does it relate to what they want? The so what is to not only paint a picture of what could be, but to make the status quo unappealing. so they say, no, you're right. The way we're doing it, or the way I'm caring for myself today, okay, I get it. And the third thing is the now what, to show people that the idea can work, because people support ideas and adopt behaviors that they think can work. And I think that the things that can work is very important, because another issue that comes up is we get very excited about a big idea, and then people say, how does this work? And we're sort of very general, you know. It's sort of like, well, then a miracle occurs here. So in communicating, be real, show it can work, and also share the doubts. So it's really helpful to look at what's needed to succeed, what might slow us down, what do we need to prepare, how are we going to evaluate progress. Another important one is what can we stop doing or doing less of. I don't know about you all, but you know, there's so many, when new things are piled on new things and we're not subtracting anything, it can feel pretty overwhelming. And the desire to take on one more thing without understanding what we can let go of often makes me want to say, I can't do one more thing. But if you can tell me what I can do less of in order to do that, I might listen to you. And very importantly, it really helps to talk about what might not work. We tend to introduce things and we talk about all the benefits and all the positives. But really, what might not work? And to introduce that actually attracts people to listening to us. So what the cognitive psychologists have found is that when we create like a worst practices list of everything that could go wrong, people actually pay more attention and they remember that information. So whether it's with a family or a patient talking about, here are all the things that could go wrong, people will pay attention to that. Or if you're introducing something new into an organization and you're trying to get buy-in, you say, here's the worst practices. You know, we've looked at this sort of process here at the NHS. We looked at this in, you know, healthcare organizations in Norway or the United States or France, and here are the worst practices. It makes people say, wow, they've done their homework, and this is much more credible. So while often people will say, what are the best practices, I want to suggest to you it might be worthwhile to also look at what the worst practices are. And so, you know, how well do you know the mistakes that others outside of your organization have made in introducing ideas similar to yours? Very, very helpful in introducing new programs. Carmen, I'm going to hand this over to you.
All right. Good. So there's some great information about that should be very encouraging to change agents everywhere. And that's it. That is that you probably don't have to convince everyone that your idea is worth pursuing to get some traction. And there's some very credible work being done in research institutions about the dynamics of groups. And in fact, social opinions, social norms change in a sort of a logarithmic way. So it's not linear, it's logarithmic. So that if you can get about 10% of the people in your organization or in your, group to support your idea, I mean, really support it, not just be milquetoast, lukewarm supporters, that you have a decent opportunity to leverage that so that you can change the entire organization. And if you think about it, and I think about it, my own journey as a change agent, I would often, you know, make the big talk in front of an audience and think that the power of my speech was going to give them a Damascene experience and they would see the way. And that's unlikely to happen. You know, you're unlikely to convince the 30 to 40% right away. But if you're willing to do, as in politics, that kind of grassroots, door-to-door work, to get 10% of the people really behind your idea, that's going to be a much more effective strategy. So what happens in terms of getting people, you know, in your organization, they're going to be somewhere in between these two poles. Yeah, whatever, or these people are so stupid. And where you want to, and you know, that's just not a very useful conversation to have. So where you want to be is more in this, you know, getting people to think about possibilities. I wonder if, open-minded. There's some good research in this Rebels and Groups book about one of the most important things that change agents can do in an organization is to level set people about what they know, right, as opposed to what they believe. So, you know, what information is important to you in shaping your views, and what information am I considering that you're not considering? So oftentimes when, you know, oftentimes we don't even know why we disagree, and we sometimes, we don't really have a disagreement as much as we have a difference in perspective because of different information that we have. So aiming to create open-mindedness in your group by asking what-if questions, I wonder if, is a very good and less threatening tactic for a change agent to use. And, you know, again, your creative wild pack, figure out who in your organization are your allies and attract them. And attract them through one-on-one conversations. And be open-minded as to who can be your ally. One of the stories I tell in the book, Rebels at Work, is about someone who was, I just thought, just a bureaucrat, knew a lot about an arcane discipline. And I just never really thought that she would be a supporter. And then there came a moment when I really had to turn to her for information. And I learned that she was excited to be able to apply those arcane skills in a new idea. So all sorts of people can be part of your wild pack. The introverts may not necessarily voice support for your idea at a meeting, but afterwards they'll come quietly and say that you're on board. So be creative in establishing your support system. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Louis. Yep.
Great, thank you. The other thing with communicating too is to, I mean, we all know this, but it's so easy to fall into it, is to really get rid of all the blah, blah and rhetoric and institutional and talk like a human. Even, I mean, it's easy to talk like a human when we're having a conversation, but often when we start doing presentations, when we're doing emails, we start talking like machines. So in order to invite conversation and get good feedback and participation is to make ideas easy and inviting. I'll probably be slapped for sharing this slide, but a school that I went to recently, a couple weeks ago, sent out an email inviting people to participate in a new program. And this is the part of the email that I got, which just sounded so institutional and boring. And if I hadn't been so fascinated in communications, I would have deleted it. But it doesn't sound like they're talking to me as a person. It doesn't really tell me what's in it for me. So we just encourage you to kind of ban the rhetoric and remember, you know, people communicate with people. This is a kind of a fun slide where in the last United States presidential election, there was a lot of experimentation with different language and subject lines. And while some people, there was one instance where the subject line was, hey, And there was a much bigger open in the email and a much greater contribution as a result of that email. And a lot of people said, wow, saying hey isn't very presidential. But in fact, it connected with people. So when we're communicating, it's important to remember we're people connecting with people and to get out of the boring jargon talk. And also to remember that sometimes we fall in love. When we create a new approach, sometimes we fall in love with it. And we just go right into talking about all the tactics and how it's going to work. And we forget to connect the ideas back to what the aspirations people have, or how it supports their beliefs, or how it supports organizational strategy. So more often than not, if you can kind of keep going back to the big idea, it's very helpful. Another interesting point that comes from the cognitive psychologists is that there are different communications approaches depending on, are you trying to get people to buy into an idea? Or are you actually trying to get people to follow through and do something? So if you're trying to get buy-in, you want to make the steps as flexible as possible. And you might want to ask people to commit to the program, not today, but maybe a month from now, and make it easy and flexible. On the other hand, if you're trying to get people to do something and follow through, that's where we have to be as detailed and structured as possible of what has to happen when, and explain it in a very straightforward, uncomplicated way. It's a small distinction, but useful. And the other thing with communicating that relates a little bit to that when we're trying to get follow-through, the more specific we can be, the more likely people are to make changes. So asking people to commit to specific actions, asking people, if they say, yeah, okay, I'm going to do that, asking them to create a specific plan for when and where and how they're going to do what they're committing to. When people actually say, okay, I'm going to do this by this date, then they're more likely to do it. If you give people specific deadlines, they're more likely to hit the deadline. So instead of saying, please get back to me in 2 weeks, if you say, please get back to me in 13 days, or if you say end of day, instead of end of day Thursday, if you say, I'd like that at 3:19 on Thursday, people are more likely to get back to you at 3:19 on Thursday. Another thing that's helpful is to indicate the percentage of people in the same town or region or organization who have committed. So that it's been a huge boost. And the more specific you can be, so that if you can even say, in this neighborhood, 80% of the people have started doing this, then the chances are that that person will adopt that behavior. And lastly, people like choices. But when you give people choices, you might want to point out what would be lost or what's at stake if they don't choose the choice that you want them to take. So being specific with people actually gets them to commit. This is an interesting example of someone wanting to, a change agent, get other people in her organization to do something. She didn't have a position of authority, but she was very specific in asking people and telling them what to do. Can you publish this letter? And then how they could do that, and giving them materials they could use to do that. So being very specific, people actually followed through and supported this idea. So often people want to help and they want to do things, and the easier we can make it and the more specific we can be, the more likely they will be with us. I'm going to skip that. So that's that summary. So maybe we'll just take a minute to kind of do a check-in on a poll here. And this poll is just kind of a check-in on the communicating. Which of the ideas you think might be most helpful in your organization? So is it framing your idea better, messaging, showing it can work, showing you know the risks, enlisting support? Let's see what people are saying. And we'll close it in just a minute. People are. Okay, so we're going to close that and share the results. And so it's a pretty mixed in what people find helpful. So with that, we're going to move on. Carmen, I'm going to pass it over to you into our final section.
So I actually think it makes sense that all those ideas pretty much got the same level of support because everyone's change agent journey is different, and organizations and groups that you're in are different. So we're going to talk about new habits, and I know we're approaching the end of our time together, so I'm going to move pretty quickly through this. So we've already talked about changing the kinds of questions that you're asking of the group, and asking the group to think forward rather than backward about the situation you're in. I love Finding Nemo. I'm very excited that there's going to be a sequel to it made soon. And there's a great scene in Finding Nemo when they're caught in the fishing nets where all the fish swim down together to break out. And so it's about doing it together versus doing it yourself. And something that's going on now, and it's a new habit at work, and I think it's a very good one, is working out loud. And I guess the other word that people use is transparency, but working out loud is a much crunchier phrase, right? And that's, get people in your organization to share what's going on, ask questions, get new perspectives. It's, a lot of what I've seen happening in the chat room during our conversation, as people have been commenting on some of the stuff that we've presented, you've been working out loud, and people have sort of scrummed in to give you ideas of how to deal with those issues. And what we do sort of as an exceptional thing in a webinar is something that we need to acquire and do as much more of a habit in the workplace. And there's it's a term, another American business book on the issue, Working Out Loud. And, what we're really about as change agents, and this is just, so critical, we're really not about imposing our views on other people or showing the way. What we're really about is building the group, people's capacity to solve problems, right? So we're about capacity building, not change imposing. Lois, you want to take it from here?
Sure.
Hold on a second.
And just quickly, one of the really wonderful things we can learn is people talk about listening. Often we listen, though, to try to solve someone's problem. And what I would suggest is, what if we listened more to help people find their own answers and what's best from them? What if we learned this as a real skill so that people thought for themselves and created their own solutions? The other thing, habit to really develop is developing an attitude of culture and gratitude. It's really one of the simplest ways that we can improve satisfaction with life and work. One simple way that I do with some groups is every Friday we sort of have a howl out where we talk about the progress we've made, or we've talked about what challenges we've had, and we work and help one another. I'd like to suggest that this whole notion of passion, you need to be more passionate, perhaps a better and more sustainable energy is to really give our attention to curiosity and what's going on and what does that mean and what does that invite us to do differently. And a very important thing that's near and dear to my heart is, how do we show up as ourselves? What happens when we share more of our vulnerability and our own uncertainty? Brené Brown says that vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity. In a dare from some things I was working on, a few weeks ago published a new book called Naked Hearted, How Bullshit, Parkinson's, and John Lennon Changed My Life. And it's really being, in order to be courageous in our work, how do we be more courageous and honest as ourselves, and to show up as ourselves, and to tell our stories. So I would suggest the more we can allow that vulnerability in, the more people will listen to us and feel safe to take difficult chances. So just new habit summary. I'm going to actually skip that poll. We're running out of time. Carmen, do you want to talk about the advice for leaders?
Yeah, I do, because I know in the poll that we began with, people talked about how they're leading groups that are resistant to change or at best complacent. So a lot of this is, again, from the work that's in Rebels and Groups. So advice for leaders. You're leading a group and you're trying to take them on a change journey. 1, ask people to be explicit about the reasons why they support the status quo. In other words, you often let people get away with saying, I don't want to change. And you need to actually engage them in a friendly, exploratory conversation about what it is, unpack the support of the status quo. 2, you need to support the people in your group who are receptive to different ideas. And the way you support them is 3, by providing them a space. So, and this gets to the point of structure. If you're a leader trying to lead people who are resistant to change, but you have someone in your group who's for you, or in any kind of leadership position, you need to have a method agreed upon ahead of time, how you're going to introduce new ideas, consider them, and move forward. So too often in organizations, the leader is about keeping the trains running on time. And really what you need to do the first week of your leadership journey is say, we're about introducing new ideas, we're about keeping up with the times, we're about making ourselves better. And when someone has a new idea, this is how we're going to handle it. We're going to have a Friday 3 p.m. meeting on new ideas. But the whole point is to create the structure, because when you create the structure, you create the expectation. And the reason why this is important is groups that don't have a structure about airing ideas, they devolve into a spiral of silence where nobody talks. You know, no one talks, person number 1 doesn't talk, and then nobody else talks. And you as a leader, that's your job, is to prevent the spiral of silence from occurring. One of the most encouraging findings in the Rebels and Group book is that they've done extensive studies and they have discovered that even when a rebel isn't right or their idea doesn't win the day, if they just speak up, the group that they're in has much better results. So because by speaking up, they force everyone to examine their ideas more carefully. So this is really important, and an important obligation, responsibility for leaders is to create the space that allows for people to express their ideas. Over to you, Lois.
Okay, we'll just wrap it up from here. This is something on my, painted on the wall in my office. Everything changes. Everything is connected. Pay attention. And perhaps the best thing I love in the chat box about being gentle and empathetic is also to, in that spirit of being gentle, to also pay attention. And know that imagining what might be and leading change, maybe in this fast-changing world that we're in, perhaps the most important professional competency any of us can practice. And I say practice because it's really hard to do. There's no right way, there's no one way, but it's things that we practice to see what can work and to practice so that we get to be better listeners, that we're more empathetic, and that we embrace what we're doing in a spirit of sort of love and good intentions and a belief that possibilities can be made real. And with that, I'll just open it up. We're almost out of time, but would love to answer any questions.
I think there's been so much activity on the chat room. I just wanted to know if we could, first of all, just hear from anybody in the chat room or on Twitter about any of the kind of questions they'd like to ask Celine, to ask Carmen and Lois. I noticed that Celine has just joined us, so hi Celine, and to everybody who's just joined us a little late, welcome. This has been a fantastic presentation. I've learned so much, but let's quickly hear from the chat room and Twitter. Any questions from your side? Jodie or Dom?
Hi, it's Jodie here. Not necessarily any questions, but I just wanted to just summarise a couple of things that have been going on Twitter. So there's been really big encouragement taken from the 10% principle. You've only got to persuade 10% of your group to believe in an idea. I think people have found that really heartening. And I liked Elizabeth Wood's comment, who said that she's going to aim for groups of 10 in the future. So I think that's cracking. There's been an awful lot of talk around authenticity, and people have really taken home the advice around talking like a human. And Richard Corder says she loves how Lois Kelly is leading as her authentic self. And Laura's now created a new hashtag for us called No Blah Blah, which I think is fantastic. I think we've got to start using that a lot more. But just to finish off, a really fantastic comment from Hannah Saeed. She says, being a rebel doesn't mean always being right. It means being someone who cares and has the courage to express it. And on that note, I will hand back. But absolutely fantastic chat on Twitter today. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jodie. And what about Dom? We've got 1 minute left. Any burning questions there?
Not necessarily questions, but lots of connections. I think a lot of energy that will go on further from just this chat session here. And I think people will continue to support each other delivering change.
Thank you, Dom. This has been a fantastic presentation by Lois and Carmen. I've learnt so much, and I'm sure all the people that have tuned in have learnt as well. There's a lot of resources that have been made available. We've got the presentation, which will be up on the Edge website for everybody who's missed this. So please keep in touch with us, and also keep in touch with Lois and with Carmen. We've got their details here. I also want to just move on a little bit and make a couple of announcements, some quick announcements before we close off. So I want to say congratulations to everybody who received their certificates as part of the school, and Kate has said this has sort of reignited rebel fire, as she reminded me to tell you this morning. I also want to talk about Transformathon. There's a slide on Transformathon which is going to be put up any minute now, I think. We've got Transformathon coming up in January this year, Wednesday the 27th of January, and we want it to be great. And please keep a watch on the Edge for updates on this one. I want to say a heartfelt thank you again to Lois and Carmen for sparing the time, and I'm not quite sure what time it is over there in the US, but for sparing the time to put together this fantastic presentation. And please keep in touch with the Twitter chat on Wednesday at 4 to 5 p.m. And you can do that with the hashtag #EdgeTalks. I want to say thank you to Kate, Jodie, Dom, and the Horizons team for really working behind the scenes to make all of this happen. And so I want to say have a lovely weekend, no matter where you are in the world. Really appreciate you. Stay in touch with the Edge Talks for the next one, which is going to be, let me just quickly make sure I've got the right date, because I might have said the wrong date the last time, but I think it's going to be the first week in November, and the precise date will be on the Edge for you to follow. So thank you again. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Lois, and appreciate everybody who's joined us today. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.